Okay, so inversions are basically when you get a warm air mass that comes in over the valley and it traps a colder air mass below it. And they're generally pretty stagnant air down lower, and all the pollution that we emit gets trapped in that as well. And so that's one of the problems that we have during the winter is all the pollution that we create uh, can't escape or go anywhere. So it just kind of goes up a little bit and then it just accumulates there. And as the days goes by, then this pollutant from your tailpipe, vehicles, other vehicles, your houses, businesses, point sources, all of that tends to accumulate in there. And then that's how we get our pollution. And when a front comes through, a storm comes through, it'll wipe out this inversion and then all the pollution goes away and then another one will set up and then it kind of starts over. And that's kind of the cycle. So EPA redesignated Utah or the Wasatch Front as attainment for PM 2.5 recently. We are meeting the 2.5 standard of 35 micrograms per cubic meter of air. Going forward, if our pollution levels increase and we go above that standard of 35 micrograms, then we would once again potentially be found to be in non-attainment. The air monitoring program, what we do is we monitor the air year round, and we have been doing it for decades. We do that so that we can assess our pollution levels. We can forecast what the pollution levels are likely to be. We can meet regulatory requirements, and we can provide data to the public in near real time. All the equipment that we run at the air monitoring network that's a part of it is pretty much all equipment that is EPA approved. Each instrument has its own protocol and standard that we have to follow to make sure that the data is of good quality and useful for making regulatory determinations. This should be what separates some of these expensive regulatory instruments from some of the low-cost sensors that are starting to get out on the market now, is that these instruments, quality control and quality assurance, meet very stringent EPA standards so that they can be used for regulatory purposes. Generally speaking, during the winter, particulate process is that we use filters. So we have to weigh a filter, then the filter has to go out and be put on the monitor where it is scheduled to run. The filter will run for 24 hours and then it will be collected by staff. The instruments, they have a stack of filters, and every night at midnight, they automatically switch to the next filter, and we can do a week or two in the instrument before we have to go and retrieve them. We get those back to our lab. They have to be equilibrated to environmental conditions, and then they are weighed again. Then you have a pre and a post weight that tells you how much particulate's been collected in that 24-hour period. You pair that to how much airflow has gone through that filter in the same 24 hours, and that gives you a concentration, and that's your daily number, your 24-hour number. As you can see, this process is the federal reference method. This process takes a number of days, if not weeks, to get from a pre-collected filter to a final number. Now, in addition to this, there is a parallel process that we use that is using monitors that give a real-time number. These particular filter numbers are great, and they're kind of the backbone of how we collect data, but they don't really do a whole lot to tell people what's happening today. So we have additional instruments that are going to collect data in near real time and are going to provide a number every 5 or 6 minutes, provides an hourly average. And that's the number that shows up on our webpage, goes to the mobile app. It gets reported to EPA's databases as well. And that's the number that folks can use to make decisions about what's happening. It's also what our forecasters use to determine what kind of forecast we're going to put out based on the increasing or decreasing pollution levels. What we do when we're forecasting, we are looking at 3 different levels that we forecast. One is unrestricted action, when people can pretty much do whatever they want. The second level is a voluntary action, and then we're requesting that folks not burn and try to use carpooling and drive as little as possible and consolidate their trips and just be smart about what they do. And then we have a mandatory action where burning is not allowed at all. And then we continue to encourage people to reduce their vehicle use and to carpool and do everything that they can do to reduce their emissions. Generally speaking, if we see that levels are going to get higher during an inversion period because the inversion looks like it's going to last for a number of days without a weather pattern coming in to break it up, then we will estimate whether we're going to get to levels that would require a moderate, a mandatory action or a voluntary action. EPA has provided a different level so you can kind of get an idea of what the levels are. Generally speaking, the level that we're concerned with is the unhealthy for sensitive groups. That is the standard. And so once you get to 35 micrograms, you're getting close to the standard. And that's when people start to feel the impacts generally. Not to say that you couldn't feel an impact at a lower level or that you're going to feel impacted at that level, but these are the EPA levels. When we forecast, we try and do it every day and not to yo-yo the public around. We try really hard to make sure that we're not changing our forecast from mandatory to voluntary and back to mandatory and those types of things. So in the morning and the evening, we make a call, try and make the call for the next day in the evening so that folks can decide if they're going to carpool to get to work, if they're going to telework that day, if they're going to take the bus or the train. And so we will try and do that. We use as many models as we can find for weather patterns with the National Weather Service. We consult with them. We look at all the instruments we have on our network, at pollution measurements and anything else that we can find that would help us. And that's how we make those calls. Even when it looks clear outside, because the forecast indicates that it's going to get worse before it gets better. And so we will make those calls as a proactive approach to try to keep pollution down. For our current season, we're looking at precipitation that's about average, temperatures average a little bit warmer. We don't have a lot of snow on the ground right now, and we don't have a big storm front that's on the horizon in the next 10 days or so. One could always develop. As you know, weather forecasts become less accurate as you get further out there. We're looking at a pretty mild season so far. We expect to have a couple of inversions because we get them every year, but we don't see anything that looks like a long-term inversion. Over the next couple of weeks, we see several small fronts and disturbances that look like they will push through, and those tend to help clean us out and keep our levels low. And so we hope to be able to get to that point without anything major happening. Historically speaking, the majority of our bad air days show up in January and the first part of February. If we can continue on this sort of forecast, then that stands to put us in a pretty good position for this year. However, having said that, you go too far out and your forecasts are less useful and things can change. It is the weather after all. As I mentioned before, we're very proactive in our forecasting. And so what we look at is how long the inversion is likely to be in place. Historically, we have seen that pollution levels can double from day to day. If we're talking 6 micrograms today for a level and we're in an inversion, even though it's clear and it's nice outside, by tomorrow, they could be 12. Then the day following, they could be 24. Okay. And if you carry that on, then you can get to the levels that are really unhealthy. And so we're trying to avoid that. By calling a mandatory action day or a voluntary action day, we can get people to drive less, burn less, and all that kind of stuff. Then we're looking at slowing those levels down. So instead of doubling every day, we might only go up 5 or 6 micrograms or less than doubling. And so instead of taking 3 days to get to 35 micrograms and yucky air, it may take 4 or 5 days. The hope is that in that 4th and 5th day, another front comes through and cleans us out so we don't ever get to the really bad air. And that's why we act in a proactive way. And so people always want to know what they can do. If the air is going to be bad, what can we do? We live here. What can we do? Just going kind of through some of these. We can reduce trips. If you have a choice between driving a cleaner vehicle, a newer, i.e. cleaner vehicle, or an older vehicle that pollutes more, and then choose the cleaner one, we can avoid burning when we're not supposed to burn. We have a Utah Air app that we can offer to the public where they can see exactly what the call is hourly, and it'll update and tell them what's going on. And probably the biggest thing that we could do here that people could choose to do is to use the Tier 3 gasoline. That will reduce the emissions from your vehicle. So if you have to drive anyway, it'd be best to choose to use the gasoline that will have your car run the cleanest and emit the least amount of pollution to add to the atmosphere and the environment. As of today, though, we're meeting the PM 2.5 standard, and our numbers look really good over the last couple of years. Our inversions have not been as bad. We still have the odd days that we go high and have elevated numbers, but the number of days has decreased to where we're meeting the standard, and it looks like we're in good shape moving